We're so grateful that you have chosen to take your time tonight to join us. And I would like to offer a prayer to begin, if I may. God of our understanding, we come to you with our burdens, our fears, our joys, and our hopes, and humbly ask that you help us to feel your unconditional love within us and through us. It is through your power that our lives have been, are, and will be transformed. Please open our ears, eyes, and hearts to the power of your transforming love for us. Thank you for this gathering of people tonight, those on stage and those listening, who are united in their desire to learn about and share in the promise of your healing touch. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pat. Good evening, everyone. I am TRACEY LEVINE. I'm the Executive Director of Healing Housing, and I am so excited to welcome you to this special conversation about the role of spirituality in healing and recovery. Our goal tonight is to have an open and honest discussion that offers insight and hope. Healing Housing is a nonprofit residential recovery community serving women with limited financial resources who are healing from addiction in Middle Tennessee. Our 2 homes provide a safe and affordable environment where women who have completed treatment can live and thrive. If we had to name the deepest intention of our organization, I think most of us at Healing Housing would agree that it is to help connect residents to the unconditional love of God. This event was inspired by the rich conversations that have taken place during our weekly spiritual formation class and with friends in the community like the one sitting next to me. It seems that regardless of each person's role in relationships to substance use disorder, whether it be personal, pastoral, or even clinical, one central question always comes up: what does God have to do with recovery? We've included information in your printed programs about each of our guests, but I want to quickly introduce them before we jump in. I also want to thank Pinnacle Financial for sponsoring our event tonight so that we can offer this program at no cost. I'm so excited to introduce our lineup of speakers. Stan BUMGARNER, who I hope I'm not blocking here, is Spiritual Director at Cumberland Heights. Ashley Cleveland, who is Grammy-winning singer and author, and who has recently joined Church of the Redeemer as an associate pastor. Our dear friend DORI GORMAN at the end, chaplain of the YMCA in Middle Tennessee, and Dr. George Matthews, a psychiatrist and medical director at TrustPoint Hospital in Murfreesboro, who specializes in addiction and mood disorders. We're so grateful to have each of you for being with us. We have quite the lineup, I have to say. Addiction is often described as a soul sickness. It's a disease that isolates people. Stan, I know that you have shared about needing a power greater than ourselves in recovery. Will you talk with us about why in your life and work you believe this to be true?
Should I use that word?
Sure.
Hi, everybody. My name's Stan. I'm an alcoholic. And it's really nice to be here with you, and thank you for the invitation. I always want to preface anytime I'm in a situation like this to say that my own spiritual journey has been like bumping along on square wheels. Just and you just make progress over time, and that the spiritual awakening process for me has been something that started many years ago and is ongoing. In the context of your question about a soul sickness, Dr. John Ishii was the spiritual director at Cumberland Heights for many years, and he wrote a great book about 12-step spirituality. And one of the things he said is that it's relational. Spirituality and spiritual health is relational. What kind of relationship do I have with myself? Am I honest with myself? Am I self-forgiving? Do I recognize that I'm doing the best I can? I'm lovable, I'm forgivable, and I'm just part of a greater whole. And also in relationship with myself, if I'm healthy that way, I'm also able to be in relationship with other people and recognize that they're on their journey, and I can be forgiving and compassionate and understanding about them. And even if we're different, we can still have conversation. And then finally, Dr. Ishii talked about the relational nature between us and the great mystery that we call God. So that's what it looks like to be healthy in spirituality. And when I'm in active addiction, I struggle to be many of those things. I'm not very honest because I can't be. I don't want you to know what I'm doing. I'm not very open-minded to new information because I might have to change. And I'm not very willing because I have all the answers. So when I'm trapped in my own solutions, my own way of understanding the world, then I am absolutely stuck before step one, where I'm able to say, I am powerless. I cannot get the life I want. And no matter how hard I try, I end up with the same results. At that point, it's so hopeful to know that there's a step two. If there isn't, I'm doomed. There's a step two that says, I came to believe that a power greater than me could restore me to sanity. And I've seen people at Cumberland Heights have their recovery get really shaky there because they go into a real deep theological question about it. And I always just encourage them to let 12-step recovery be your power greater than you for the time being, and let your understanding of the capital G God evolve over time. So I guess my quick response would be that we need a power greater than us, because if I needed to do heart surgery on myself, I would be in big trouble if I was trying to do it. I need other people. I need people that have the experience and knowledge and wisdom and education to teach me how to evolve as a person. And so I move out of the isolation that you were talking about and into community. And so I think that's probably about my best answer.
I love it. Great answer. And I love that that it isn't something, from what I hear from you and from my own journey too, that it doesn't have to happen overnight. And if you don't feel it on the first day, that's okay. It takes time, and community certainly helps. I'm going to hand that over to Ashley. We know that people into recovery with varying personal stories and histories about God and religion. Sadly, at Healing Housing, many women come from fear-based or damning faith backgrounds. There is so much shame. And in 12-step groups, community is described as a fellowship of the Spirit. Ashley, will you share about what your years in recovery and the communities of 12-step programs have taught you about faith and God?
Sure. So, you know, I have to say that I was fortunate in that I did not grow up in an abusive religious environment, and my experience of God, you know, I had a warm feeling towards God. I think my issue was that I was not at all convinced God had a warm feeling towards me. And nor did I think I deserved any kind of warmth. So, but I did feel that there was an ongoing dialogue of kindness between us. And I came into you know, I came into the rooms of AA, and I will identify myself as a double winner, which means that I'm not only a member of AA, I'm a member of Al-Anon as well. And I was born eligible for Al-Anon and probably needing a drink. So I came into the rooms of AA because alcohol was destroying me, alcohol and drugs. And, but I also came in with a conceit that I was not entirely conscious of, and that was that I felt like I did need AA to help me stop drinking. And I'd been hospitalized, so I'd had treatment. I understood some of the mechanics of addiction, and I understood that I needed help and that I probably needed a program. But, you know, where I drew the line was, I don't think these people have anything to tell me about who God is or how God is. And, you know, I grew up in a Judeo-Christian environment. I'm a follower of Jesus. And I just kind of drew the line there to the point where I almost, you know, I mean, my big book is falling apart, but I almost completely skipped the letter to the agnostic because I thought, well, that doesn't apply to me. And over time, you know, it's so funny because the letter to the agnostic is all about the second step. And over time, I think what happened for me was I realized that not only did the rooms of AA have much to teach me about sobriety, that God used those rooms to teach me so much about God's nature and God's character. And it wasn't so much that my faith changed, because it didn't. But what happened was it deepened and expanded. And the main thing that happened was that I saw the kindness and generosity of the God I believe in working in people's lives, whether they gave him credit or not, you know, just over and over. And people, you know, in our tradition, you know, we say that, you know, God's not really interested in looking at what you're doing, that he's much more interested in your heart. And I saw people's hearts change over and over again. And this, you know, and honestly, it so impacted me that it gave me the desire to completely give my life over to that God. I thought, if this is what you're about, I am so in. Mm-hmm. I am in forever. And I don't know that I would have had that experience outside of the rooms. There was just such a generosity of spirit. And I will say this, one of the reasons I think it happens for us is because that is where we learn to tell the truth. We learn to tell the truth of our lives. And it all begins with telling the truth, in my opinion. And I also want to say that it is so important to separate the Spirit of God from religion. They are two entirely different things. So that's...
I have to say, Ashley, two things that I thought of when we're sitting here. And one is that if 23 years ago, when I walked into my first AA meeting, if I would have known that I was going to be leading a conversation about... That's funny. Because I got to tell you, I was ready to get sober, but I didn't want anything to do with any kind of religious, which it was experience. So that, I had to laugh at that. And then what you said, for me, a real leveling moment was the first time I was in a circle and holding hands at the end of a meeting and seeing people of all socioeconomic levels, color, and broken, and yet coming together. And that was my, like, okay, I'm in. I can do this. So, George, I'm so interested to hear your perspective as a doctor working with patients who are struggling with addiction. It may surprise people to know that in our work at Healing Housing with healthcare professionals of all types, spirituality is almost always cited as key to successful treatment paths. Even if programs don't advertise it in their brochures, clinicians on the front lines usually have a healthy respect for the divine mystery of 12-step programs and the spiritual path of healing. So George, I would love for you to talk to us about the characteristics of the patients you treat who are suffering from substance use disorder, and what does it seem that they need most to heal, and I guess where God fits into that. That's a lot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tracy. A delight to be here. I want to talk both from the perspective of the patients we see and the attitude of the healthcare profession. Persons with addiction who get admitted to the hospital generally tend to be quite severely ill. That's almost by definition because one of the requirements for hospitalization is some potential threat to the person's life. Otherwise, you don't get into the hospital. You can seek a lesser level of care. Most of the people that we see in the hospital come in with a need for treatment of their withdrawals. Many of them come in with medical complications of their substance use. And for some of them, they go through severe emotional distress, again, related to their addiction. This is very understandable, and we try and help them. Now, I want to introduce here the attitude that we have been trained in and what the healthcare profession generally has, which is that, hey, we need to fix every problem that comes before us. And we have a tendency to try and do that. Now, we know that if the person has been in addiction long enough, then invariably their addiction takes a toll. It affects their physical and emotional health. It also affects their finances, their occupation, their relationships, their family. But most of all, it affects their core sense of self. And one of the exercises I have for my patients is just to write out, who am I? And they all say, hey, that's no problem. I'll have it for you in 15 minutes. But most of them don't complete it even on the day they leave, because when they have to really get to it, it's a struggle. And we tell them, hey, it's not just the roles that you have. You're not just a parent or a sibling or a child or a spouse or a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Who are you at the core? And they struggle with that, and it's not just them. I have our students and staff also work on that, and it's a struggle for everybody. And I dare confess, I found that it was a struggle for me as well, trying to look at what the essence of who we are is. I want to come back to the issue of addiction. We see addictions, you may have heard this term, it has often been referred to as a biopsychosocial-spiritual condition. Medical science is very good at delivering the biological solution to the problems that they present with. If they're in withdrawals, if they have medical consequences, we can fix them, and we do a good job at that. We do a fairly good job at addressing their psychological problems. We do a so-so job at addressing their social problems. But when it comes to their spiritual problems, we are usually at a loss, because they don't teach us that in medical school. There is no tablet that can deliver the spiritual need that the person has. What we discover is that the person who comes in that late stage of addiction is deeply wounded, has suffered multiple losses, and typically carries a great burden of shame and guilt for their multiple failures. They also carry this burden of resentment and bitterness towards various people who they feel have let them down. And sometimes they shake a fist at the world and at God as well. What the addict at that stage needs is grace, is forgiveness, is mercy, is another chance. But they need it at a point where they least deserve it. Their behavior does not warrant that. And typically what they receive from family, from employers, from others around them is a boatload of criticism. This is what you did wrong. Did I not tell you not to do that? And they usually get a dissertation on everything they've done wrong in their lives. When we speak to their spouses or significant others, what we get is a long list of how this person has been doing wrong, has not listened to our advice, and tends to keep doing it their way. And there is so much frustration. We can often empathize with the person just wanting to disappear. To the addict, the problems caused by the addiction often tend to be solved by more of the addiction. They tend to go back to their addiction to escape from whatever they've been struggling with. And that is the challenge we feel. So what's the solution? In keeping with the theme of today's talk, dun, 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 enter God. Okay?
I thought you were going to say enter healing housing.
Yeah. But I want to say the characteristics of God are grace, mercy, forgiveness, and the power to transform, to renew, and restore. Now, even though I said enter God, in all my years, I've never seen God have a dramatic entry into a patient's room. But I want to say that it is the godliness of others that presents God to the individual. And I have to say sometimes it's the techs on our unit who take the time to tell them there is hope. Doesn't matter how bad things have been, there is hope. A better future is possible. And it is the godliness of others who can instill in that person who's at the risk of considering ending his or her life to say, hey, there is hope, there is forgiveness. We are not sitting in judgment over you. And I'm so delighted that places like healing housing exist where others, through their godliness, present this nebulous God in a meaningful way to the individual. So once again, they have hope. They believe that something is possible even though they can't yet see it. And we'll hopefully talk a little more about it. I'm over my time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I have a million things I could respond to on that. And I will say this because I can't hold back, but I think that, I say many times at Healing Housing, it's all the in-between moments. Like clinically, we can offer therapy and this and that. But I think what you were referring to is a lot of the in-between care. That's the cup of coffee, and that's the restoration of hope and cheering for each other and connecting with one another. I don't think there can be enough said about that, and that's been my experience at Healing Housing, that it's a lot of the in-between moments where God shines the brightest. DORI. DORI is a huge part of the community of Healing Housing, and she has been with us for quite some time on our spiritual formation classes. She joins us in leading morning devotion, and I think that she is the epitome of bringing God into Healing Housing in a way that we all find to be inclusive and wonderful. Our conversations with you are really why we are here tonight. And as the YMCA's Middle Tennessee chaplain, you know better than most that brokenness is a universal human condition and that we are all recovering from something. And I've loved our discussions about that. Will you share with us what you believe God has to do with healing and recovery, why you feel that all of us could be called addicts in some way, and how religious trauma can create hesitancies for people in recovery?
Well, my name is DORI, and I'm in recovery.
Hi, DORI.
Okay, I was just making sure I was in the right room for a minute. But no, I say that. I have grown accustomed to introducing myself more and more that way, although I do not, at this time of my life, have an addiction to alcohol or drugs. I do believe I am in recovery, and I believe all of us are. When you were describing just then that, the patients that you see and someone who's in active addiction, the fear they face, the shame, all of that I just couldn't help but think, man, that is a human condition. And we all, need that experience of recovery. In some ways, if you don't think you're an addict, but you own one of these, you might want to think again. Because we all have our devices that we use in some form or fashion to escape or to numb or to dissociate. And some of us have found devices that are healthier than others, but we all have that. And I don't say that to make light of anyone who's in an active addiction at all, but I do want to sometimes we can other that as the stigma that someone else out there has, as opposed to something that we all have. And at the same time, I think when asked the question, what does God have to do with recovery, that first step you referenced, any journey that's first step begins with I am powerless, is a faith journey. And I love that statement of just saying I'm powerless. One of the small groups I've been a part of that we offer at the YMCA is called Journey to Freedom. And the author of that, Scott Reel, who's in Middle Tennessee, is in recovery. And when he was going through his own 12-step journey, he just thought, this needs to be for everyone. How can I make this accessible for everyone? And so that's the whole idea behind Journey to Freedom, is it's made accessible to everyone. And every time I lead one of these groups, when we don't start with first week saying I'm powerless, because we're with people who don't know that and haven't hit bottom and aren't there to say that yet. So it's about week 5. And it's always interesting to see when we go around the room and you say what you're powerless over. And the number of people that kind of squirm in their chair and just kind of aren't really there ready to say that they're powerless. And I always have to remind the group, we're not saying that you're helpless. We're saying that you're powerless. And that's very, very different. It's different to say, I'm powerless and I need help, inner step 2. But so often, I think, in my own experience, I've found so many people that feel like it's saying, like, I'm helpless, so give me power. And it really has to be flipped for you to really begin surrender and saying, I need help, and I can't do this on my own. And I need a higher power. I need a power of a community. Those relationships you talk about, how we can find the divine in one another when we're real, when we're honest, when we're vulnerable. My life has forever been changed by Healing Housing, and I've only been a part of it for a little over a year now. I think I love it so much. Unfortunately, my background is in church. I've had a great experience in that I have not experienced a lot of religious trauma. So sometimes I say, I've got nowhere to go but down. But I know I have so many close friends in my life who have. And one of the things that has moved me so much about Healing Housing is I feel like this is community, this is the church or the ecclesia as it should be. Because there's this posture of, Father Richard Rohr says this phrase that I love, I have nothing to prove, nothing to protect. I am who I am, and that is enough. And that is what I find at Healing Housing. And too often, I think on the religious side of things, the religious hurt, depending on your upbringing, sometimes churches, it's like, I have everything to prove, and I have everything to protect, and you're not enough. And we miss it. And so I think in recovery communities, have so much to teach the church, to actually say to the church, you're in recovery too, or you should be, and remind us that we all are.
I appreciate that, because I know, again, for me, a lot of it was this feeling that, my representation, my earliest experience with God was through going to church. And for me, from the earliest time I can remember, I felt that I wasn't good enough to be at church. And I honestly don't know where that came from. I carried that with me for many, many, many years. And I just thought that church was just for really good people that were born really good. And I did not. Raise your hand. So I appreciate you saying that. What I'd really like to do is give everyone now a chance to respond to something that you've heard here on the panel that moved you or that you want to add to. Do you want to start us out, Stan?
Sure. So this idea of having a disease, alcoholism, and the way the steps talk about this. When you were talking, Dori, it occurred to me that I heard in a meeting one time that if you just think about it as dis-ease, we've all heard that, but it makes so much sense to me because I can fall into dis-ease well into recovery. I can fall into dis-ease if I'm not connected to my community and I'm not getting good feedback and I'm not being of service to people, and I'm not praying and meditating. So that idea of, and my dis-ease looks like time travel. And I don't know if anybody else does this, but if I'm in my dis-ease, I'm really regretting things that I've done. I'm kind of depressive about that, but I'm also time traveling into the future and borrowing trouble that may or may not happen. And while I'm time traveling, I just can't be present. And I know before we were talking about that while we were having dinner, that the need to just be in this moment. And when I do that, and I really appreciated what you said about godliness, that in step 3, I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood God. I was so stuck on that step for a long time until someone said, you don't have to worry about understanding, just experience. And you will experience it through the care. And the care showed up with my sponsor and people that were in the program with me and in the rooms, and people that would just sit down and be very real with me. And so that ties into the way I understand God, that God works through other people. And it's just a powerful way for me to remember how to be present when I am trying to be of service to someone else, but also when I let someone else be of service to me. And I remember to be in this day, because everything changes when I do that. And when I make a commitment to be of service to my wife, to my children, to my coworkers, to the people in recovery, but it just shifts everything. And we were talking about Rob Bell earlier. He makes a comment. It's a contemporary Christian minister, if you're not familiar with him. He's done a series of videotapes. And one of them, he talks about a life of prayer. And a life of prayer being where we never stop asking ourselves, what is God doing in the unfolding creation right here, right now? And how can I be part of it? That's really resonates with me. A life of prayer is me looking around and saying, how can I plug in and make a difference? So, I mean, I don't think I have anything other than that to say. I just really was moved by what you both said, so thank you.
You know, I think I want to respond to what Tracey said about, you know, that the churches are full of the good people. And, you know, and I would just like to qualify, first of all, that any goodness in me is highly suspect. The end. But really, you know, I think my experience that a lot of people that I've dealt with trip up on that goodness piece. It's like, I'm a good person, this shouldn't be happening to me, or I'm, you know, everything is prefaced by, I'm a good person. And I have to say, one of the great gifts of my recovery is by the time I crawled in, and let me tell you, I crawled out of a pretty low bottom, my goodness was off the table, because I already knew what I was capable of. And I'm also capable of goodness, too. I think humans are very porous. We have all of those tides running through us, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, all the time. But what happened for me in relation to God was that because I wasn't worrying about, am I good, am I not good? I just, you know, or do I deserve this, or do I not deserve this? It was more, it made this open space for gratitude. And gratitude is the thing that has changed everything in my life. Because I know everything I have, everything is a gift. And I am so, you know, it is a relief not to worry about my goodness. It's a relief not to worry about, am I a good person? I'll let God worry about that. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to dwell on the term recovery, but to use it in a slightly different context. And I want you to think of a tear in the upholstery of your couch. Our instinct is, gosh, we don't want the tear, let's darn it up. Or as we do at home, just turn it over. But the other concept is, hey, I can get this reupholstered so that I have a fresh covering and I feel like this is new. What the addict needs is that sense of newness, of having yet another chance. And we don't get it because typically, and when I say addict, like you said, it includes all of us. There's nobody who is free of addiction of some kind. If nothing else, we are addicted to comfort. We are addicted to wanting some kind of relief from whatever we go through. And all of us are in need of that reupholstery. But how do we get reupholstered when we look back at our lives and we see not just one or two tears, we see countless tears in our own fabric. And that sense of being recovered is something really beautiful. And I want to talk about this because we had somebody who talked about having a business of an agency. They were dealers for something that was very lucrative. And out of that conversation came the idea of being an agent for God. And I know this might sound preposterous, but anytime you can do something good, you become an agent, as we said, the godliness that is manifest in you. And one of the things we urge people on the unit to do is try and do something good to help somebody else. And when you do that, you become an agent of the highest possible station you could aspire to. That might not be all you do, but that helps with the upholstery of the countless tears all of us carry in our lives. And it's available to each one of us. And even the addict who can only see all the terrible things that he has been reminded he has done by his wife or girlfriend or doctors or sometimes even the church, because we're very good at pointing out flaws, not at lifting them up from what they're going through.
Why do I have to keep coming after you? I'm like still taking in so much goodness from all of you. It's so great. It's so wonderful. Yeah, I'm still really sitting with that idea of goodness because I was thinking some of what you said about like you don't know where you got it from, but you were just constantly always, am I good? Or I don't think I'm good. And I think I can speak to my experience. I understand the importance of coming to a place in your life where you realize you have a problem. But I do think sometimes we are told that from the beginning, are not even told that we have a problem, but that we are a problem, and which are two different things. And I'm going to speak pastor for a minute, so forgive me. But I think sometimes that original sin concept, we start the story in the wrong place. We start it with, you're a problem, you know. And so much of my reading of that first chapter of Genesis in the book of the Bible is this again and again and again, God creating and God saying, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then this crowning moment of creating humanity in God's image and saying, it's very good. And there's this original blessing that's upon us and that's meant that we're supposed to do. And of course, we turn the chapter and we read the problem and it's there. But I think so often, even in my own training, if I'm going to tell people about Jesus, you start with, you're a sinner, you know. And I don't know about you, I didn't really have to be told that. It was a new discovery to me to go, oh, but there's a very good in me. Some of the work I was doing prior to coming to Tennessee was in Chicago, and we were doing a lot of community development work with an approach that I love. So most often when you go into what might be called an at-risk community, which in this day and age, every community is an at-risk community, but you're told to like, what's wrong with this place? You know, we've got it. There's poverty, there's crime, there's drugs, there's all this stuff, and we have to go fix it. But my background training is in something called assets-based community, where instead you look for the assets, you look for the good. And what's the goodness here? So as for me, who identifies as a follower of Jesus, I don't come in saying, I'm going to bring God into this place. And I'm going to tease you for a minute because you said, Dori's really brought God into it. And I was like, I've discovered God at Healing Housing. God has been there long before I started knocking on the door. And in that same way in communities, God's working there. And so often we would say, everything needed to heal this neighborhood is already there. We just have to discover it. We'll take that on an individual level. Everything needed to heal each of us is right here. It's right here. And so much of, to me, the 12 steps is, let's discover that. Let's discover what's already there. And you were so hinting at those relationships, and it was bringing back memories. We even had hand motions because we were designed at the very beginning to be in an intimate relationship with God, where God and humanity walked in a garden together in this authentic relationship with one another, where the humans were naked and knew no shame, but also this incredibly honest relationship with ourselves. And then we could have this creative and restorative relationship with the world. And that's our design, and it's within our DNA because we're image bearers. And so I love that recovery of how do we recover that? How do we recover the upholstery? It's just beautiful. So I mean, in so many ways, I feel indebted to Healing Housing because I've met God there far more than I've brought God there.
Well, that's really beautiful, and I'm going to go off script because of that. So hang on with me here for a minute, because maybe my concept after hearing you really needs to change. I mean, one of the reasons that we brought you all here is, I've said it numerous times, like, we're asking 12-step recovery that we need a spiritual transformation. We need a spiritual experience. We're told even, that this is what's going to make it different this time, like to have this experience. But as I've said, you can't go to a therapist or a psychiatrist and have them write you a prescription for a spiritual experience. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And to hear you say, as a pastor, that you're not bringing God to people, you're finding it in the community, and that's really making me flip-flop, because my question to each of you, as pastors, as doctors who believe a spiritual experience needs to happen, is how do you bring that? How do you lay the ground for that to happen? So I'd be curious what your thoughts are, and maybe DORI, maybe you're right, DORI.
I don't know about that.
But yeah, I would love to have you to respond to that. If it's something that
Sure.
Yeah,
I think the work that I do so often is so much more like a gardener. And I'm going to say this as a complete novice who still calls soil dirt. So that just shows you what I don't know about actual gardening. But in the sense of, you're right. I cannot manufacture a spiritual experience. And from my experience, someone in recovery would sniff that out in a heartbeat and be out the door. So it really can't be. So it really first starts with my own spiritual encounters. And what I mean by that is a daily grind of showing up and sitting on my porch in silence and praying to be in the presence of God. For me, that comes in the form of a practice called centering prayer, and opening God's word and reflecting and doing that. And some days going, I didn't really get anything out of that, but I'm going to keep showing up and keep showing up. And so I think that's a huge part of fostering that for others, because if it's not coming from someplace real, that will be sniffed out pretty quickly, or at least it should be. So I think there's that. And then I think it is that tilling the soil. And really, for me, it's my own surrender that it's not my job to provide the growth. I just keep tending to the soil and trust that if I keep coming back to the soil and doing what I can, that God will provide that growth and those experiences.
Thank you. George?
I really appreciate what you just said there, because we have an interesting exercise we do with patients on the unit after they've been there a while. And it's just called a mutual appreciation class, where everybody has to find something positive to say about the others on the unit. And most of them, when they've received some appreciation, are genuinely surprised that anybody saw anything good in them, because what they have received over time are multiple layers of flaws. And they see themselves as deeply flawed people who have done wrong repeatedly. And they don't feel that they can rise above that to ever get to goodness or godliness. And when somebody else can identify it in them, it becomes a revelation, and it proves what you just said, Dori, that there is inherent good in everybody, including when they're going through the worst of times, except that it gets smothered by the layers of guilt and shame and all the wrongs that we have done. And if we can allow that to surface, if it can be recognized very often through the eyes of somebody else, because the individual does not see it in themselves. And for it to be identified through somebody, and one of the best things we can do is to help them see that it was there in them all along. And the more we can do that, I think the more it empowers them and allows them to believe that there is good and there is hope for a better future.
So in spiritual, part of the definition, or one aspect of spiritual direction, is that you sit with people and look for the presence and activity of God in ordinary life, in a person's everyday life. But there's also, I find too that sometimes that's a stretch for people. They feel like God's not present, and that's why they're there. Or if he is present, whatever is happening, they don't like it. So for me, part of direction has become asking people to tell me what they're longing for from God. And that, a lot of times people say things and they're not listening to what they're saying. And one of the things I really love about spiritual direction is, I'm not there to advise anybody. I'm not there to teach anybody. I'm not even there for pastoral care necessarily. I'm really there to listen to the person and listen to the Spirit of God. And that's a tall order, man. So, but there are moments when somebody can identify what they're longing for. And if you ask, when was the last time, or can you describe to me a time when you felt particularly close to God? And most people, if they've had any kind of experience at all, they've got access to that. And that can open up a whole new world of dialogue. And you know, it is, it's kind of, it's such a beautiful thing to see it happen, but I'm also so aware that of my own, you know, that so much, I laugh because, you know, I was in a 2-year apprenticeship that was pretty intense, but most of it was designed to get me out of the way. Which I thought, if I'd known this was the training, I would have been out. I wouldn't have done it because this is, you know, but then at the end of it, I thought, you know, this is such a gift to me because I really, at this stage in my life, I'm looking to decrease because I want to see the Spirit of God increase. I can say that. You know, and I've got a real healthy ego. It's not like I'm up here becoming a saint or something, because that'll never happen on any day. But it's because when I see the work of the Spirit of God, it's like, it's so surprising. It's so unexpected. And it's so beautiful and so perfect in a way that I think, I couldn't have come up with this. I wouldn't have even approved of it. And I'm so excited. So, anyway.
I think working with people who are searching, sometimes the simplest thing to do is just give them permission to search and to let them know there may not be an answer in this moment. And just to keep searching, and part of the searching will get us closer and closer. And I love to hear stories that make me think about it, and I love to share stories. And I would like to share one because somebody told me this a long time ago, and it really helped my understanding of it. And it's the story of a little fish that's swimming around, going up to other fish and going, "Pardon me, can you tell me how to get to the ocean?" And no one will talk to him. And they just kind of blow him off. And he finally goes up to this huge fish that's off to the side. And he says, "Pardon me, nobody will help me with this. Can you tell me how to get to the ocean, please?" And the big fish spins around and looks at him. And he says, "This is it. You're in the ocean." And the little fish waits just for a second. And he says, "That can't be. This is just water." And swims off. That's what I think God is like. Mm-hmm. I think we're absolutely swimming in this thing that we try to attach words to, and we try to recognize it, and it's just beyond us. And at best, we can be present to it and experience it. So that's how I'll.
Wow, I love that. I think, you know, as I'm reflecting on what everybody said and thinking that as hard as recovery is, and there's many people tonight here who can relate to this, honestly, for me, the most broken that I've been in my life has been when I've connected the deepest with God. And so I wouldn't trade that for anything, even though I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And I know a lot of the experiences at Healing Housing are heartbreaking and they're hard to hear. But I've said this many times over, you know, the more broken we are, the more space for the sunlight of the Spirit to shine. And so that is like the most beautiful visual I have of God. And I believe you stand 100%. God is everywhere. And I've never seen God's presence for me. I'm privileged to work with the women that I work with and to be in that with them. But God's presence shines very brightly in our homes, and there's a lot of, I think by a lot of standards, we'd consider it very broken in a lot of ways. But the Spirit shines brightly there. So with that, I'd really like to, I want to get to having, well, really, I think we are going to need to move on to, if there's any questions that you all might have for our speakers tonight, you can direct to anyone on the panel or leave it open. We'd love to hear from you.
And they can come out to this microphone.
Thank you. There's that lovely microphone. And if there's no questions, what I'd really like to hear, honestly, I think to end tonight, is something beautiful that you shared, Stan, in prepping for this, that the most hopeful words in the English language are, there is a solution. So I think any closing words that you all might offer about solutions, or I'm sure that there's people here tonight that might be struggling. If you have any words of hope that you'd like to offer, we would love to hear that.
I think I would just say that our tendency is to feel like we're all alone. And that's how our disease gets worse. There's hope in connection. And for me, it requires surrender and getting out of my own way and accepting that journey towards wholeness comes by stepping out of the darkness of my isolation and into the love and the light that I find in the recovery community. With people who can say, I've been there too. That makes all the difference, that sense of compassion and empathy. Yeah, I understand. Is a very hopeful place to move towards and in. So that, I guess that's what I'd say.
So when I first came in, I started trying to recover in 1985 and stayed sober for 7 years, but I didn't recover because I was not teachable, and I cherry-picked the program and said, I'll do this, that's acceptable, and I won't do that because that doesn't apply to me in any way. And inevitably, 7 years later, I relapsed and drank off and on for about 6 years. And when and at the end of that, I told God in my prayers, I know I'm an alcoholic. I know this will always get better, worse, never better. But I don't think I care. I don't think I can face the world without a drink. Nor do I think I want to. However, if you want to give me the willingness, that's okay with me. And it was the most half-baked, half-hearted prayer, I'm telling you. It's like there was no emotion attached. It's like, whatever. I didn't even think he heard me. And then a couple months later, for no good reason, and by that I mean I had not been to jail, I had not wrecked a car, I had not wrecked a relationship, my husband had not left me. Everything was kind of ordinary. For no good reason, I walked into an AA meeting, and that was a long, long time ago. So I do think that prayer for willingness, for me, changed everything.
Almost riding on your coattails here, I want to talk about a rather archaic word in the King James Version of the Bible. We probably read it several times. It's a word that says, behold. And it does not translate too well into any of the modern words, but it suggests wait and see. And I want to use that for myself and want to recommend that to everybody. Behold, wait and see what the morrow reveals for you. We usually have the sense that we only turn to God after we are out of any tricks. And usually we still have a few tricks up our sleeve, so it's not yet time for God. But if we can truly behold, if we can wait and see and observe what happens in our life and see the handprints of God, something's happening. And the more we see that revelation, the more we recognize that, hey, there is a bigger hand guiding me. I love the third step, which talks about turning our life and our will over. We sometimes flippantly say, yes, I'm ready to turn our lives over, but not really our will, because our will still has some ammunition of our own. But when we can surrender that and say, I'm going to stop doing it, and I'm going to wait and behold, beautiful things happen. We can be amazed and see that there is a God who still cares for us and is still interested in maneuvering our lives towards something beautiful and wonderful.
You know, in preparation for tonight, we had lunch together several times, and I think, Deb, it was you who we were talking about when you're not sure about this whole higher power thing. And when you know, if maybe you haven't prayed in years, maybe you've never prayed, and I think someone had given you the advice, when you don't know who to pray to, just say, "Dear not me." That's always a great place to start. And I thought that's pretty remarkable right there. And so before you even spoke, I thought of this way to, I'm not going to be presumptuous enough to close the night. You will close the night. But I did want to invite all of you to a prayer practice that sometimes we do at Healing Housing. I think we've done it once or twice. So if you so choose, I invite you to close your eyes with me, or to look up or soften your gaze. And I don't know if you've been holding your breath tonight, but perhaps to take in a deep breath, to feel your feet on the ground, to loosen your shoulders, to stop sucking in your stomach, just let it hang out, and keep breathing in and out. And maybe, just maybe, we can have the invitation to stop the time travel. So whatever the past mistakes and failures and whatever you carry, or the fears of tomorrow, may this be a prayer for presence right now, without any numbing, but to be here. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Amen.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being with us tonight. I want to thank Brentwood United Methodist Church for hosting us. I want to thank the women of Healing Housing for being such an inspiration to everything that we do, for staff and volunteers who helped bring this together, for our incredible lineup of speakers. My prayer tonight is that this conversation will continue. I hope that you were moved as I was moved and have been moved by this continual journey that I'm on with connection to my God. And I hope that there will be a series 2 and a series 3, and that you will continue to join us for this conversation. So again, thank you so much. God be with you, and have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you.